here. I don't know if you noticed, but you were suggesting during the DAO discussion to do like little clips and things like that and the top takeaways. There this morning, one of the new mediums that was released was a top takeaways from the DAO discussion. So definitely keep an eye out for those. Okay, I think we'll just go ahead and start. Like I said, there's a lot that's happened over the last 2 weeks. I was actually looking at my notes from the last community call, and I was surprised that it was only then that Carbon was initially announced. Before we get right into Carbon, though, I want to go over a few of those things that have happened over the last 2 weeks. The process of migrating the protocol-owned liquidity from V2.1 to V3 and reopening direct withdrawals from V2.1 was officially completed not long after the last community call, actually. I think it was only a couple of days. Almanac, they are continuing to make their daily recommendations to the amount of on and off curve liquidity for WBTC, ETH, Link, and DAI, along with recommended changes in the trading fees of those four pools. They've been posting weekly reports to Discourse, and I believe in our channels as well. So if you are curious to see the sort of progress that's being made there, definitely, I would recommend going to Discourse and taking a look at it there. There is a proposal up on Discourse. It's level 1 at the moment. Last call, I mentioned this proposal had just gone up on Discourse, but I want to seriously encourage everybody to read through it if you haven't already, because it does present a new concept that will result in burning BNT and helping to alleviate the deficit. And it is expected to appear on Snapshot next Sunday, December 10th. Actually, last time I mentioned this proposal, I highlighted the second half of it. I actually want to take a minute to do that again, as it's changed since then. Previously, it was proposed to allow a wallet to be exempt from pool fees if it arbs the protocol and uses those gains to reduce the deficit. It's changed to instead include a smart contract that anyone who finds an arb can use. Again, if you haven't read through it, I highly suggest at least doing so before the 10th when it goes to Snapshot. Twitter Spaces, we actually had our first Twitter Spaces, Carbon Twitter Spaces, a week and a half or so ago. We had some great questions submitted from the community and the DAO, so thank you guys for that. Whether you submitted the questions or you were able to attend, definitely appreciate it. If you were not able to attend and haven't listened to the call since then, it's accessible through the Carbon Twitter and through the Bancor YouTube. There was a medium that was released on the Carbon medium. It was the top takeaways from the call, and that was shared throughout the channels as well. So you want to know what happened there, definitely a great way to kind of get the TLDR, I guess. It's a few pages, but there were some really fantastic points that were hit on. So recommended for sure. DAO discussion. We had our first DAO discussion on Carbon this past week on Discord. It was really great to actually speak with everyone again, with members of the DAO and the community, especially after, about Carbon for the first time. A few really interesting things came up in conversation. And Mark, I thought maybe we could take this opportunity to run through a couple of those.
Certainly.
Okay, so first was actually a question from a community member that came in not long before the call had started in one of our channels, asking how exactly sells take place on Carbon, whether it be 5% in small increments or how that actually works. And I thought maybe you can touch on that and elaborate a little bit, explain it.
Yeah, so I think so the question is, is clearly inspired by the range, the users being able to set a range. And if you've been using traditional limit order books before, it's clear that you have to sell a certain amount of tokens at a certain price. Where bonding curves behave slightly differently, because the number of tokens being sold and the price are sort of functions of each other. And so it's not the case that it will, that it will actively, wait for some sort of, price to become available and then search for some way to sell those tokens. That's not how Carbon operates. Carbon operates still very much like a standard AMM in the sense that takers use the liquidity on the protocol, but the difference is that rather than having the price set by the protocol, the price is set by the user. Other than that, the general bonding curve mechanics will still apply, and so this is should be familiar to anyone who has previously used something like Uniswap v3 or is currently using Trader Joe. You can still select certain price ranges to contribute tokens to, but the number of tokens that are bought over that range and the specific price that the taker pays for them is contingent on how many is contingent on the transaction that they're actually using. So yeah, it's not an auto sell bot, if that makes sense. And I think that's where some of these questions are coming from. Maybe the way that we presented it isn't perfectly clear, but it's not a bot that takes your liquidity and then tries to actively move those tokens onto another exchange at a certain price and does so in regular intervals. That's not how Carbon works. How Carbon works is you set up your price range and you wait for takers to take that liquidity from you at the price that you've set. So the normal hyperbolic bonding curve type mechanics are still present in Carbon. So it will behave, at least in that regard, very, very similar to other concentrated liquidity AMMs.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. And that might be where the confusion is coming from, whether it's a bot or not, because I had seen a similar question: is the AMM doing the selling? And we had touched on that one a little bit during the DAO discussion as well.
Yeah, I think that's clearly coming from the same place. So it's the same familiar setup. You will contribute your liquidity to a bonding curve. The difference is in Carbon, the bonding curve is just yours. You aren't sharing it with anyone else. And so if you set up your tokens to sell between a certain range, then that is the range that the AMM will present to market participants, and it's up to them as to whether or not they decide to take you, at the prices that you've set. So yeah, it's not selling the tokens in the active sense, but it is selling the tokens in the passive sense, the same way that AMMs already do. So it's definitely this hybrid between bonding curves and AMM mechanics and order books that I think is proving to be the thing that we're going to have to focus on with respect to educating everyone as to how this thing actually operates. But it should feel pretty familiar, I think. After we've got some of this education material out, it will be very intuitive.
That's the other thing I was going to bring up, because I've even found myself now referring to Carbon as an order book system. And I've heard you do it a couple of different times. And maybe before we confuse anybody, we can bring a little bit more clarity to that. It's kind of like this hybrid, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want me to speak to like the order book component?
Yeah, if you don't mind, because
Sure.
I see it being referred to as an order book and an AMM as well. And so maybe we can just connect the two, tie them together a little bit better.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, well, first let's discuss the parts that are order book like. So with an order book, you are literally setting, so generally what you'll do, right, if you're setting a limit order, you'll say, my name is Alice, I have 1 ETH and I would like to sell it to someone when ETH gets to $5,000, please, right? And then they put your name in a book, they put the number of tokens that you're selling and the price that you want to sell them at, and it has to wait for someone to take all of your tokens at that price. Carbon is very, very similar to that, because that is, essentially what is being done, but in a smart contract and blockchain sort of way. The user will interact with the system and say, this is the number of tokens that I want to sell, and this is the price that I'd like to sell them at. The difference being that rather than choosing a single price, which you can choose a single price, in which case carbon is identical to an order book. But if you want to, you can choose a price range. And that price range component is still using, basically an augmented version of the constant product bonding curve equation. But it just behaves like it's a zoomed up version of it, right? So the traditional concentrated liquidity idea. So when you're providing your liquidity, you can choose your range, right? We don't have a tick system, so this is very different from something like Uniswap V3 or Trader Joe. There are no ticks. You can choose any range that you want. And that includes, prices above or below whatever the AMM is currently trading at. So if you're in a rush to get rid of tokens, and many people are in some situations, you can actually set the market. You can set your own sell price to be below market, which is something that a lot of other concentrated liquidity AMMs actually struggle to do. So you can do that, and as the range is filled. And for those that have had this conversation with me before about how to work out, what your average price is on an AMM, it's some function of the starting price and the end price, and you can do this for any trade, but you can also do it for an entire order, which is kind of the generalization that we've used in order to get carbon working. But I think that the specific mechanics and mathematics of that is something that we should probably save for like a dedicated DAO discussion. Maybe I can prepare some material, some slides or something, so that we can have a much more informed conversation there. But that aspect of informing the protocol, how many tokens that you want to sell and the precise price that you want to sell them at, and then waiting for someone to take you at that price, is essentially describing, an order book functionality. So the AMM component, in a way, is the fact that you don't have to choose a single price, but you can choose a price range, and that we use bonding curves in order to express that. So, maybe the difference between an AMM and an order book is starting to become a little bit blurred here. But, I still prefer to call Carbon an order book style protocol rather than an AMM, because I feel like AMMs have a very distinct meaning, which is that the protocol prescribes the price for you. You can contribute tokens, and it will trade them in such a way that you're hoping that the price trades sideways, so that you're long fees. Right. This is a very specific sort of trading strategy that AMMs usually ask its liquidity providers to adhere to, whereas Carbon is very much a rejection of that paradigm. So that's the difference. And if I had to choose one or the other, I would prefer the term order book than AMM.
Got it. Thank you. You mentioned possibly preparing slides and doing some sort of a DAO discussion on the mathematics. You had mentioned the token launcher. We'd spoken about the token launcher previously and the PowerPoint that you had prepared for that. And that seemed to have some interest. I wanted to follow up on that a little bit, since you had just brought up, possibly doing another one in that same sort of style. This was the token launcher, if I'm not mistaken, was actually mentioned the day that Carbon was announced by one of the community members in our Discord. And since then, we had spoken about it a little bit. I want to touch on it, how this was kind of like the original idea and how this product was built using the adjustable bonding curves and asymmetric liquidity. Not too much, because I'd like to obviously, I want to have this as a DAO discussion as well.
Yeah. Okay. So what you're raising is that, when we had that DAO discussion, someone asked about using, the Carbon essentially as a token launcher. What's interesting about that is it was something that was explored, long before I told anyone about, Carbon, even internally. I think that, the inspiration, or, the motivation for Carbon, I think, as we all know, is that we need a really killer product, something that generates a lot of revenue, so that we can start backfilling the deficit problem that we have with V2.1 and V3. And so after I started looking into these new bonding curves and the idea of asymmetric liquidity and adjustable bonding curves and so on, the very first thing that I wanted to do with it, because I thought that it would be the fastest way to bring a product to market, was actually a token launcher. So I've already prepared a full slide deck that kind of explains like a possible mechanism. Is just sort of a thought experiment. It's not like a full pitch or anything, but it's an exploration of how these new mathematics can be used to create to create a token launcher platform that has very predictable characteristics and might actually help to alleviate some of the stress points that the industry faces with token launchers today. For the people that requested it, I've given that slide deck to Jen. She's happy to share it with you. But if you want, I'd be very happy to present it myself on a DAO discussion or something if that's something that everyone's interested in. I'm a little I want to make sure. I don't want to say I'm reluctant. I'm very happy to do this, but I want to make sure that people don't confuse it though with what Carbon is or can do. It's just a very good demonstration of the fact that Carbon is a general purpose engine, right? It can do lots of different things, and we've got this limit order book style product coming out that we're calling Carbon. But you could imagine, right, a token launcher platform using the same logic. Could be you could call it hydrogen or oxygen or something. I don't know. But the point that is that the things that it does is very general, and it can be used in a range of different contexts. And the token launcher model was just one of them that we considered. Very briefly, what that looks like is essentially dialing in price discovery over time. One of the things that you might be thinking about or worried about if you're participating in a new token launch is a couple of things. Well, one is if the funds that you're using to participate in the token launch are actually going to be going towards development, which is something you generally don't have a very good assurance of, unless you know the team well, or if it's if the token launch is happening through a vault system or something else. But if it's just happening on any one of the let's say less attractive token launcher platforms, then more often than not, they're rug pull scams essentially. There was a paper published in Archive just recently that was looking at how many of the token launches on Uniswap v2 were illegitimate. And that's not Uni's fault, obviously. This is just people using Uni for to achieve nefarious goals. And so, when I was looking at that, I was like, there might actually be something that you can do there that provides, early adopters of a new token project some assurance that things are being handled correctly and that there's no, malicious intent on behalf of the people that are launching the token, and to create a system that people can use, permissionlessly in order to perform these launches is something that I was interested in doing. I think that it didn't become a priority because we're in the midst of a pretty vicious bear market, and I just don't see a huge number of teams launching tokens anytime soon, and so finding a more general purpose, more let's say time sensitive or time appropriate product that's relevant straight away was where the development resources went, and this is why we've got Carbon. But these other ideas will obviously, have their place in the sun, I hope. And if it's a token launcher that you want, then it's something that I'm very prepared to discuss. But that's not the end of it, right? There's a very, very long list of potential products that you can build using this infrastructure.
Perfect. Thanks. So this speaks more to like Bancor becoming the umbrella and these future products being released under this umbrella, aside from Carbon, just using those same innovations that Carbon uses.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there has been some, I don't know if it's legitimate confusion or if it's just the hecklers, our hecklers on Twitter, trying to find some convenient foothold. But yeah, Carbon is just a product, right? It's just a name, a word, like V3 or V2.1 or something. It's just it's the name of the new product. But it's meant to, right, rather than just have these infinite version numbers, which are unhelpful for lots of reasons. One being that with a system like the one that we're envisioning, it won't necessarily be that each product should necessarily replace the last, but that you can have a range of products coexisting within the same ecosystem. And yeah, Carbon is helpful was the first one because it kind of describes the core infrastructure that powers a whole bunch of similar products, or can interact with a whole bunch of different design ideas to achieve different purposes, which is kind of related to the way that carbon is in organic chemistry. It can be pieced together in a whole bunch of different ways to create different molecules. But yeah, a token launcher could have its own elemental name, or it doesn't have to be an element. This is obviously something that I'm not really the right person to talk to about, because I consider this branding and marketing, and that's not really my forte. But yeah, Bancor is the umbrella and Carbon is the product. And if we have a token launcher, it will have its own product name. And if we do other kinds of products, they will all have their own product names. And it's not that one supersedes the other, but all of these things will exist in tandem.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so we're kind of speaking about the things that can be built using these sorts of innovations. I had a question myself, actually. When I was asking about the progress being made on Carbon so far, and we'll speak to that also. Actually, you know what? Let's do that first, and I'll get to my question after. Maybe that might be an easier flow for us. Can you give anybody who isn't aware yet of the sort of development stage we're at, or the progress that has been made so far, just an update in that regard?
Yeah, so I'll say pretty much the same thing I said on the DAO discussion, which is that it wasn't the case that we waited for the white paper or the light paper to be published before the smart contract work got started. The coding has been an ongoing activity this whole time, and I would say that we're kind of I honestly feel we're definitely past halfway. And having said that, I think that the most difficult parts are behind us, right, in terms of the development cycle, which should be encouraging. We still need to approach auditing firms, obviously, so there's still some way to go. But getting from nothing at all to something that can be audited is the most difficult part of that process, and I'm glad to report that that's about where we are. But the other thing I think I said was that something that I don't know how many community members and DeFi participants are actively aware of, but when you've got something that is sort of brand new, right, and has features or functionality that no one's seen before, there's what you do yourself, right, to make that product ready. But then there's also what you do in sort of business development relationships and other things to inform others of what you're doing. And the reason for that is that you can't just assume that they will want to interact directly via the UI, for example. They may want to build their own API, or they may want to even build their own individual smart contract system that interacts with your smart contract system. There are a whole bunch of of things in DeFi, especially at an institutional level, that require their own development cycle, right? Once something new arrives on the scene. And so it's really important that we sort of advertise and educate everyone that may be interested as to what this protocol can do, and give them the correct development tools and advice to make sure that when we are ready to release the smart contracts, that they have also had an opportunity to develop their own systems, and so that on day one, right, there's a a host of potential integrators that are ready to launch with us. And so that process has also begun, and those conversations are ongoing. So I'd say that, yeah, we're pretty deep in the development cycle right now. It's not something that we've just started.
Okay, that's exactly where I was going to go with that. You said other residents in the DeFi space that may want to build their own interaction layer on top of it. So I was going to ask you to elaborate, and I feel like you kind of already have. You mentioned institutions. Is that the sort of like residents in the DeFi space that you're speaking to, or that you were speaking to?
Yeah, sure. One off.
Okay, so a variety.
Yeah, there's all kinds of people, right? You can imagine, even some just individuals who are super users of DeFi. You know, they might want to make their own system ready that no one uses but them, right? And that's totally reasonable. But then you also find, in some of these other financial firms that they will have their own smart contract development team whose sole purpose it is to to build their own systems infrastructure to interact with DeFi, and it's solely for the reason that they don't want to go to all of these different projects' websites and click on MetaMask 100,000 times and complete transactions that way. They would rather interact directly with the blockchain. And so you need to kind of give them a heads up. And so I'd say that while yes, it is sort of like mostly institutions that need that kind of that kind of guiding light or that kind of heads up for in terms of development lead time. It's not only institutions, right? It's also it could be individuals or small teams or small funds, that kind of thing.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so I guess lastly, I wanted to end it more on a personal note, and I mentioned this in previous calls and in the channels as well. But I personally posted something on Discourse recently, really just speaking to you guys, to the DAO, and to the community regarding carbon and a little bit of that confusion around the branding, the deficit, how I personally hope to see the fees from carbon be applied towards alleviating the deficit. I would love to encourage everyone to add their thoughts onto that thread, onto that discussion. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, I know everyone wants to have this discussion. There are lots of questions about whether or not the fees are going to be going towards the deficit. I also think that it can be a great way to possibly come together and even brainstorm additional ways to generate fees using carbon. And I think that as we continue to learn more about carbon and the types of products like the token launcher that we were speaking about just previously that can be built using adjustable bonding curves and these sorts of innovations, that will kind of gradually shift towards maybe a natural progression into maybe even new products and things. So I just want to ask everybody to at least, put your opinion up there, help me start this discussion. It's something that I feel everybody wants to have, but we're not really having in one specific area yet. So I would just assume let that be the place if you guys would like. I think that really kind of sums it all up for today. Thank you everyone for joining, and please don't forget to check out the top takeaways from the DAO discussion and the proposal, the level 1 due to hit snapshot next week. Have a great Sunday, everybody, and hopefully I will speak with you all soon. Any other questions, reach out in the channels, or you can always, ping me and DM me directly. Thanks, Mark, for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for joining the call.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely.